So it's a Tuesday, kids, and looking forward to dealing with some inspiring questions and issues that you guys have sent in. We actually have quite a list of great questions that you've sent in ahead of time. And we'll be able to probably deal with some that you'll send in live, but we've got quite a list that has been sent in, so please do send in your questions and issues as far ahead of time as you can. Send them to me at greg@reallove.com, and it just makes it easier to take a look at them, and some of them just need editing down. Some of them get a little bit long, and some are a little convoluted, shall we say. It just makes it easier to read them. First, my husband and I have been doing Real Love for only a couple of weeks, and we're making some remarkable progress. We've seen a reduction in the anger in our relationship that I would never have thought possible. I want to pause just long enough to say to those who are watching that sometimes people say to me, so how long does it take to see progress in Real Love? And if you follow diligently the principles that you read about and hear about, you can see a difference in yourself and in your relationship in a very short period of time. If you've been lost and confused and have no idea how to interact in a relationship, if you've been engaged in mindless and repetitive getting and protecting behaviors and have not known what to do and have been doing the same unproductive things for a lifetime, knowing how to behave differently can make a huge difference in a very short period, days, couple of weeks. Now, we continue to practice and get better and become more loving and become better at being more happy and fulfilled over a lifetime, but you can see a difference fairly quickly. Understanding true principles makes a difference fairly fast. How long does it take once you've lit a match to see a difference in utter darkness? It's instantaneous. Now, the more light you add, the more you see. So, sure, you want more and more light, and the more practiced you become with more light, the more you see in the room. But, boy, that first flicker of light is revolutionary from complete darkness. So I understand what you're saying here. And then she continues, but I have a question. I have a suspicion that my husband may have been unfaithful to me in the past year or so, and I want to confront him about it. But I'm afraid that it will turn into a huge blow-up. I don't want this to ruin the progress that we've made in Real Love, but I'm also concerned about the health issues, you know? So how do I approach this from a Real Love standpoint? On the whole, at this point, you're talking about making significant changes, significant improvements in the anger and in the love in your relationship just in the last 2 weeks. And so on the whole, I would suggest that you don't confront this issue of the possibility of an affair. Why? Because it's all about real love. You're building the love in your relationship. So you're talking about a decrease in conflict, you're talking about a decrease in anger, you're talking about getting to the core issues of your relationship. And it's the core issues, which are love, emptiness, fear, anger, conflict. Those are the core issues. It's the core issues that led to the possibility of an affair. Do you want to bring up the affair, which is a secondary or peripheral issue, and interfere with the progress you're making with the core issues? You know, that's kind of bringing up the secondary stuff that's going to interfere with the primary stuff. It's getting your priorities all mixed up. So I would suggest that the yield for the potential risk isn't worth it. So why do that? You haven't been bringing it up to this point. The risk-benefit ratio just isn't worth it. So, let's imagine, for example, that let's imagine that I told you that he did have an affair 6 months ago. That I knew that. I had videotape to prove it. Well, we'd already know the reason, wouldn't we? The reason would be that he was empty and afraid and didn't feel sufficient love. What would the solution be? The solution would be to increase the real love in your relationship, which is what you're doing. So, let's say I had videotape to prove for an entire 6 months that he had not had an affair. But you still have anger and conflict in your relationship. What would the solution be? To increase the real love in your relationship. So you see, the solution's still the same. So stick with the solution. Now, so it really doesn't matter whether you know that he did or he didn't. The only possible reason you'd want to know would be for reasons of your health. So what if he is, passing on to you a communicable disease? That would be a reason to know. That's a valid reason. So in that case, you would want to have a conversation with your gynecologist and say, I have a possible reason to wonder if my husband has had an affair within the last year. I don't know it. I'm not sure of it. We're right now working on a relationship. I don't really want to confront him about this right now, not because I'm afraid to, but because our relationship's improving, and I don't really want to introduce this bit of sand into our chewing gum. I don't really want to do that. So, are there any tests that you think it's worth running on me when I'm not having any symptoms? Do you think there are any? And your gynecologist, he or she, will tell you whether there are any tests that he or she thinks are worth doing. So if you need some sort of health reassurances, the person to talk to is not your husband. The person to talk to is your physician. So that's what I'd recommend. And keep working on the emotional and spiritual health of your relationship. That makes way more sense than having a great big confrontation with your husband and screwing things up. Then, as your relationship becomes more healthy and your husband feels more loving, more loved, and safer, at some point in the future, you can say, if there have been any past infidelities or indiscretions, I don't care now, but, I'd kind of like to know. Or at some point in the future, he'll feel safe enough, he'll tell you himself, and you won't care. And I've seen that happen in a number of marriages. By that point, it'll be like a non-issue. So that's what I would suggest to you. Here's somebody who says, there's a marital issue. Let's go to one of parenting. My daughter, Brittany, told me something that really worries me. She stayed with her dad for 2 months during this summer. Her dad, her stepmom, and baby brother live with his parents. Grandma, her dad's mom, watches Brittany most of the time while he works. That was during the summer. Brittany has been back from Dad's for 2 weeks now. Out of the blue, on Saturday, Brittany started telling me that her arm is sore. Now, this is after 2 weeks. And expressing her feelings of how Grandma pinches her arm really hard when she gets mad. She acted out her feelings and started yelling at everyone like they were actually in the room and told them how she feels, saying, Papa, don't make Grandma mad. Please don't make Grandma mad. Dad, don't make Grandma mad. She says that when Grandma's mad at Papa, that's Grandma's husband, or Brittany's dad or anyone else, that Grandma will pinch Brittany's arm really hard right below the shoulder with her 2 fingers and thumb, which, by the way, is right near a collection of nerves. I was immediately upset when I heard this and told her that nobody has the right to touch her. I also had to make a call to get some advice because my own feelings came up of being so angry at her dad for letting his mother hurt her, my daughter, and fears because of how she's treated me and her own children in the past. This is the grandmother. I was immediately in fear for them treating her like this, which had nothing to do with Brittany. But I could see Brittany took it personally when she said, in other words, when I got upset, I could see Brittany took it personally when she said, oh, I was just kidding. In other words, my daughter tried to take it all back. And I said, well, what do you mean? Did it really happen? She said, yes, but I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. Also during the summer, while I was on the phone with Brittany, I overheard Grandma come in from work and start screaming at Brittany before she could even say hi. So clearly this child is being screamed at by Grandma and physically abused by Grandma while she's over at Grandma's house. And apparently this happens fairly often. So she goes on and talks more about how Grandma, does this fairly often with Brittany, and Brittany wants it to stop, but Brittany's afraid to talk about it because she's afraid Grandma's going to be mad at her, and Brittany's really terrified of this woman. And so what she's looking for is suggestions as to how to handle it, but the child doesn't want the mother, who's writing here, to tell anybody about it because she's afraid that everybody will become more angry at the child. So what does this mother do? Because this child is terrified that if she, spoils the child is afraid that if she tells the secret, everybody's going to punish her even more. And what I suggest to you is, this is the kind of bullying that ends up just leading a child to feel utterly terrified. This is why bullying continues, is because the bully has such power over the child that the child is not only afraid to confront the bully, but the child is afraid to report the bully. And so it continues on and on. Bullying is the single most common form of violence going on among young people in the United States. This has been thoroughly documented. This is the thing that leads to, most commonly, the shootings that go on in the schools in this country. It's a vastly underreported problem in the schools, and it continues on through adulthood. More than half of the workers in the United States report having been bullied in their workplace in corporate America. And 1 out of 6 workers in the United States reports being bullied in the workplace right now. And 70% of cases of bullying in the workplace in the United States end up not being resolved by doing something to take care of the bully, but end up with the person who is being bullied either quitting or being fired. So it turns out that the person who's being bullied gets not only bullied, but losing their job. So we're doing a terrible job of protecting the people who get bullied. And here your daughter is not being protected. That doesn't mean you should step in and make her feel like a victim. But we just need to simply, calmly, lovingly step in and do something to make it stop. And that's make it stop like right now. As in, it will never happen again. So this is an opportunity for you to teach her that bullying will never happen and that she will not be victimized, which is different, by the way, than being a victim or acting like a victim. It's an important lesson to teach her about being abused. Abuse happens. There will always be people who will attempt to do things to us. We can always choose what we then do in response. And she needs to be taught that. The people who are bullies tend to continue bullying, tend to continue to abuse us because we allow it. That's why. Bullies pick on people who are the most helpless. And that's what you need to say to her. You need to say, Grandma is not well. Grandma is treating you badly because it gives her a feeling of power. Your daughter is, I think you said, 8 or 9, or she's old enough to understand this. It gives her a feeling of power to control you. And this is something you don't ever have to allow ever again. So you need to tell her that she continues to do it because you let her. And you don't have to let her. I'm going to be there with you by supporting you. And I'm going to give you some of the words to say if Grandma ever does this again. And I'm going to give you the words to say. And if you find it too difficult to say, I want you to promise me that if it ever happens again and Grandma doesn't stop it, then I will step in and help you. But first, we'll see if you can handle it by yourself. Because it's always such an empowering thing if we can give a child the words to say to handle it on their own. So, if she can try to handle it on her own, great. If she were 4, there wouldn't be anything you could do. But if she's 8 or 9, she may be able to do this. Now, if you go to give her these words and she absolutely can't do this, if she just can't speak these words, you're going to have to step in and do this. But I'm going to offer you a suggestion. So she's being physically bullied. She's getting physical pain inflicted on her just for the pleasure of the person who's doing it. She's being essentially tortured. So you tell Brittany what she can say to Grandma the next time this happens, and these are just some possible words you might say to suggest to Brittany. If you do this again, this is Brittany speaking to her grandmother. If you do this again, I will talk to Dad. If you keep doing it, I will talk to Mom. That's you. And she will talk to the Department of Child Services, or whatever you call it in the county or state you're in. Every state calls it different. Child welfare, child whatever. And then your daughter says, do you understand what I just said? If you do this again, I will talk to Dad, then I will talk to Mom, and Mom will talk to the Department of Child Services. Do you understand? And then you help her until she can say those 2 or 3 sentences, whatever it was, until she can say it without stumbling and without hesitation, but without being angry, so that she can communicate to Grandma not as a threat, but as information what will happen if she does that again. And if Brittany can't do that, then you need to step in and do something. Grandma is terrorizing this child. If one adult were to do to another adult what this woman is doing to this child, you go to jail for this. So she doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to do it 1 more time. 0 more times. A man does this to his wife, the police come and they pick him up and they take him to prison. Really? So why does a grandmother get to do this to a kid? They don't. And so you need to talk to your daughter until she understands that it's wrong. And explain that. You say, a man doesn't get to do this to his wife. A grandmother doesn't get to do this to a child. Now, if the grandmother were saying, for example, you haven't completed your chores, and so you have to go to bed early, or that's a consequence. But we're not talking about digging your fingers into a child's shoulder to inflict physical pain. No, that's not a natural consequence. That's bullying. It's beating up on the child. No more. 0. That's it. You get no allowance for that. None. Let me know if that was confusing. If I wasn't clear. And just be sure you don't do any of this, oh, you poor little baby, because you don't want the child to feel like she's a victim. No, there's no crying and wailing here. Just here's the action we take. And it teaches a kid that there's always a course of action. There's something you can do. Here's somebody who says, I've had my fair share of expectations over the years, and I had thought that I had become pretty good at taming the unacceptable ones. I'm new to real love, and am beginning to have my eyes opened, I think. My husband recently filed for divorce, but then a few weeks later has agreed to hold off on things and perhaps give us another try. As for what I can see for now on my part, I'm really struggling with some expectations that seem so logical to myself. How can I overcome these or deal with these as they come up? Here are a few of my expectations. So let's take a look at your expectations. See if they look reasonable. And I'll just give you my opinion. One expectation. I expect that my husband will not flirt with other women. A very reasonable expectation. Why is it a reasonable expectation? Because it's reasonable for us to have an expectation where there has been a promise made or a contract made. A contract is just where there's a mutual promise. Same thing. Contract's just two promises. And he did make a promise. When you got married, there was a mutual promise made of sexual fidelity. And when he flirts with other women, he is breaking that promise. So it's quite reasonable for you to have an expectation that he would be faithful to you sexually. He is not being when he flirts with other women. But, listen, just because it's reasonable to have an expectation of his being faithful does not justify your becoming angry when he's not faithful. So, if, for example, he's flirting with another woman and you become angry at him, what you're doing is, here's a man who is flirting with other women, could only be for one reason. He's empty, he's afraid, he's alone, he's feeling unloved. Not just by you, but a lifetime of feeling unloved. And he's trying to fill himself up with the imitation love you get from flirting, which is, praise, power, pleasure, sex, it's the whole thing. And so here he is drowning, and then you come at him angry, and all he hears is, I don't love you. Well, this isn't going to work. So the only approach is to be loving and to say to him, when you flirt with other women, I understand why you would do that. You would only do that if you feel empty, if you feel unloved. And I can understand why you would feel unloved. You haven't felt loved from the time you were a kid by your parents. You haven't felt loved because I haven't loved you unconditionally either. So you're telling the truth about your own behavior also. I just want to also tell you that, well, it's two things. You want to say, I'm doing the best I can to learn to love you unconditionally better. So I'm doing the best I can with my part, recognizing that I have failed to love you unconditionally. But when you flirt with other women, I want you to understand that I find it difficult to be loving because I feel like you're being unfaithful to me. I'm not going to tell you not to flirt with other women. I'm simply telling you the effect that it has on me and that it makes it more difficult for me to feel more loving. That's all. You're simply describing the effect that it has on you, as opposed to telling him, don't do that. Telling a drowning person to stop drowning, to stop flailing around, is uniformly unproductive, which I'm sure you've noticed. And he hates that. I'm guessing you've probably had more than one argument about that. So why keep having them? Next expectation. I expect that he will not play into the sympathy of other women for attention. Well, that's kind of a two-part expectation. First, let's do the two parts. I expect that he will not play into the sympathy of others. Well, that's not a reasonable expectation, because what you're saying is, I expect that he won't act like a victim. That's nuts. That's like saying, I expect my husband, when he's drowning, will not act like a drowning person, that he won't use one of the getting and protecting behaviors. Well, that's impossible. Drowning people drown. And drowning people thrash and kick and act like drowning people. There's nothing he can do about that, except gradually learn more about real love. The second part of this expectation is that you expect that he won't act like a victim with women. And that's part of the same expectation we talked about first, which is that he won't be unfaithful to you and play the little games with women. And then you would have the same discussion with him about this as you did with the first expectation. Third expectation. I expect that he will not look at pornography. Reasonable expectation, because, again, same thing as the first expectation. It's all about being sexually faithful. And although I'm still utterly astonished at the rationalizations men use when they're looking at pornography, amazing, they're all rationalizations. When men are looking at pictures of poorly clad, or shall we say, or unclad women, they are being unfaithful to their wives. Period. Because they're being emotionally unfaithful, very often physically unfaithful. They're not focusing their emotional and physical sexual energy solely on their wives, which is what being sexually faithful means. Period. Sometimes I've said to men, so when you promise to be sexually faithful to your wife, did you promise to be 70% sexually faithful? And then they smile because they know where this is going. 80%, 88%, 92.4%. No, it's 100%. And if you're looking at pictures of other women, it ain't 100%. It just isn't. It couldn't be. So, you may call it a minor thing if you want to in your head to rationalize, but it's not 100%. It's not. So, and it gets really easy when you say, would you mind if she were doing the same thing with pictures of guys? Yeah, they'd mind. So then it gets really easy. Last expectation, or at least the last one listed. I expect that he will not call me names or react in anger toward me. Well, honey, good luck with this one. Again, now you're saying, I expect that he will, when he's drowning, not use getting and protecting behaviors. You can't do that. When people are drowning, they have to save themselves from drowning somehow. And it's all they got. You can't expect that when somebody's drowning, they're going to put their hands at their side and slip quietly under the water. So it would be nice if he could drown and never affect you personally. But it's not possible to drown like that. When people are drowning, they affect the people around them. And you happen to be the closest person to him. So he will affect you. It's impossible for him not to. It's just the way it goes. So the only way to solve this is for you to become as loving as you possibly can, for you, as an example of real love, to become a motivating reason for him to learn more about real love, and over time, that tends to make more difference in relationships than anything else. But for you to demand that he stop his inconvenient behaviors, I don't know if I've ever seen that work. Telling your partner, don't be angry. I can't recall a single time I've ever seen a spouse say to their partner, I want you to stop being angry, and then have the partner say, gosh, I never thought of that. That's a really good idea. I think I will stop being angry. Not one time, ever. Then she continues, because I've been empty, afraid, and blind most of my life, when he has not lived up to these expectations, I have felt that he was taking away from my happiness and destroying my ability to ever experience happiness. I also experienced great fear that I was not a lovable person. And it's understandable that you would feel that he was taking your happiness, but that's a really huge misconception. He can only fail to give you love. He can't take from you love. He can only fail to give it to you. You're expecting him to make up for a lifetime of no love in your own life. And he really can't do that. That's why all of us are responsible for finding as many sources of unconditional love as we possibly can, becoming as happy as we can, and then contributing whatever love we can to our partners. But to demand that our partners do it, I was working with a couple recently, and I was talking to the wife about, doing work in real love, and she said, well, you're expecting me to love my husband. I said, no, I'm not, really not. In fact, I'm not expecting you to do anything with your husband, except be available so that your husband can practice loving you. That's all, really. And I must have said that half a dozen times before gradually she began to hear that. I'm not asking you to change. Just to hang around and stay committed to him while he learns to love you. Because he'd been a bit of a stinker for a long time. And as I was talking to her about participating in counseling with him, she was hearing me say that she needed to become more loving toward him. No. As we work with individuals in partnerships, it's always about teaching them to become more loving to their partner. That's always the way it goes. And for them to find as many sources of real love as they can. If we count on our partner to make us happy, we're pretty much dead. She continues, I've reacted by showing my disapproval for him when he does these things, and at times withdrawing my love, avoiding him, avoiding conversation with him, or even sarcastically pointing out his failure to meet whatever certain expectation he was not meeting. These reactions have become quite automatic, so much that even though I can now recognize them, they haven't disappeared. Well, no. We tend to automatically do what we've learned over, decades. When he blames me for his actions, I can really feel my defensiveness become incredibly huge. It rises so quickly and can become so completely enveloping that I can't seem to get control of it. I realize I experience many negative emotions due to my own defensiveness. I'm beginning to see that my own defensiveness can be getting in the way of allowing others to really see me. So I guess my question is, how do I tame the beast, myself and my expectations? Really easy. And you can read about it in any of the books. When you can feel your expectations rise and the beast getting out of control, shut up. Immediately be quiet. Because nothing that comes out of your mouth from that point on is going to be productive. Then be wrong. Recognize that if you're angry, you're out of control, you're not being loving, you are wrong. Then go get loved by somebody else, not your husband. Then when you've got enough love, come back and give that love to your husband. Very simple. So be quiet, get wrong, get loved, and then come back and be loving. So simple. My sister-in-law, and those of you who have questions, please do submit them. We may not get to them all because we have quite a list. And then we'll try to get to them next week. Don is going to be capturing all of them. So please do send them live now. And then if you send them ahead of time to me at greg@reallove.com, then it's much more likely that we get to them. My sister-in-law, whose name is Susan, got a divorce 4 or 5 years ago. And her parents gladly paid for it. They really had never liked my brother, John. Less than a year after the divorce, though, John, my brother, moved back in with Susan and has been there ever since. Susan has gone to great lengths, though, to keep her parents from finding out that John moved back in. They live in different states, so the deception, the lies, only come up like twice a year. At Christmas time and in the summertime. All the grandkids spend 2 weeks with her parents in the summer, and then they spend a month with Susan every Christmas. She coaches her kids, who are 25, 29, and 11, on how to lie to her parents in the summer. And then at Christmas time, John, her ex-husband who lives with her, moves to a friend's house. She's intimidated by her father and feels a need to please him. So everybody's lying. But that's her business. If Susan wants to lie to her parents so that they don't disapprove of her, let her. None of your business whether Susan's lying. So anyway, you continue. My dilemma is with the interaction my kids and I have with their parents. Susan coaches me and my kids to make sure we won't let the cat out of the bag. I think her parents are suspicious that something's going on because they ask us questions about Susan and John that make us feel really awkward. My kids, who are 35 and 29, and I have discussed the situation often, and our approach has been to deflect the question with something like, well, I don't know what's going on with Susan and John. You'll have to ask her about that. But even that is lying because we do know what is going on with them. What is the most loving way to handle this situation for everyone concerned? And what are the lessons that I can teach my kids from this? Now, it's up to you what you teach them, but I can only describe what I would do and what I think is consistent with being loving and honest. And that would be to teach your kids, who are adults and they can do whatever they want to, that other people get to lie. We don't get to control them. And if Susan, your sister-in-law, wants to lie her head off, that is none of our business. She can lie all she wants to. If she wants to deceive her parents, let her. Go for it. I mean, it's none of our business to be the thought police and call her parents and say, Susan's lying. I mean, that's the kind of tattling we used to do in the 6th grade. But you are not obligated to lie for other people. So all you have to do is leave out the part where you say, I don't know what's going on. So when they ask what's going on with them, you just say, you'll have to ask them. You don't have to say, you don't know. You just say, you'll have to ask them. And if they persist and say, well, do you know? You say, you'll have to ask them. Now, you haven't lied a bit. And if that arouses their suspicions, well, too bad. And if Susan is mad about that, well, tough. See, people are always trying to make their own decisions, and then they want to avoid the consequences of the decision. People want to drive fast over the speed limit, and then they don't want to pay the speeding ticket. Well, you do the crime, you do the time. And if she's avoided the consequences this long, well, okay. But if she gets caught by her parents in a lie, then I'll be darned. That would be the natural consequences of her making the decision that her ex-husband moved back in. That's her right to do. It's nobody's business that her ex-husband moved back in. She gets to do that. But if her parents find out about it, she gets to live with the consequences of doing it. That's just the way it goes. And you don't have to protect her. Here's somebody who says, I'm struggling with the primary decision. The primary decision, for those of you who don't know, it's written about in the marriage book. I think it's on page 160 to 165. The primary decision is simply the decision in a marriage relationship to make my partner, to make my wife, if I'm the husband, to make my wife the most important person over every other person I know. To make my marriage the most important relationship over all other relationships. So that makes my marriage relationship more important than any business relationship, more important than the relationship with my children, more important than the relationship with my parents, more important than every other relationship. Why is that so critical? Because the relationship between a husband and wife makes the two of you one unit. If you don't make the primary decision, a marriage will be absolutely torn apart by all the million other little secondary decisions that have to be made by a million other people coming along and saying, well, but what about me? But what about? And before long, the two of you will be pulled apart and the marriage will lose. Parents will come along and give you advice and say, well, but listen to me. And the children will say, but I need some money. And the marriage will suffer. Whereas if we make the primary decision that we will put our partners first, no matter what, even though in the short term it looks like a child may suffer for a moment, a parent may lose out on a decision for a moment, the two of you will benefit so much in the love that grows from making that primary decision that everyone around you will benefit from the love that multiplies as a result of you making the primary decision. So that's what the primary decision is. This person says, I'm struggling with the primary decision. I see the necessity and benefits from making it. However, I just realized that there's a part of me that feels like if I make the primary decision and I'm the only one who does, in other words, my husband doesn't, then my needs won't be met. I know it's selfish of me, but it's what I'm feeling right now. And you have to forgive me because I'm kind of chuckling, because my question is, if you don't make the primary decision, will your needs ever be met? No, they won't. So that's my response to anybody who says, well, I'm not sure I want to make the primary decision. Good, then you're dead. Because people who don't make the primary decision always lose. Always. I've never seen people who don't make the primary decision have a truly happy, fulfilling, richly fantastic marriage. Never seen it happen. So when people who don't have richly fulfilling marriages, who have not made the primary decision, say to me, I don't know, if I make the primary decision, my needs won't be met. I'm going, your needs aren't met now. And they look at me like, how did you know that? I'm going, because you haven't made the primary decision. That's how I know. So there's no risks, what I'm saying. You don't make it, you lose. If you do make it, is it possible that your partner will not reciprocate and meet your needs? Is that possible? Yes, it is. It is possible that your partner will not reciprocate. But is it possible that you will lose? No, it isn't. Because if you make the primary decision and you put your partner first and you become an unconditionally loving partner, you will benefit from becoming a loving, more loving human being. You can't lose by making the primary decision, is what I'm saying. And this, it's kind of like the way it works with pretty much anybody in any relationship. If I choose to love you no matter how you treat me, you treat me like a dog. And I decide I'm going to unconditionally love you anyway. How can I lose? I'm going to be happier as a result of becoming a more forgiving, happy, loving human being. I win. If I'm married to you and I make you the most important decision over everybody else, and you decide to just take it in and lap it up, take it all and not return it, I still win. Because I win from learning how to prioritize correctly by becoming more loving toward you. A few times my kids, my parents, a few others may lose out in individual situations. Those are tiny matters. And I'm telling you, in the vast majority of cases, 95% plus, if I continue to make the primary decision and put my partner first, my partner's heart will melt. You think it's worth it for a 95% success rate? Yeah, I think so. I do. So I suggest make the primary decision because the risks are insignificant and the potential rewards are huge. Our daughter, new question, Amanda, is engaged, which is exciting. And although the wedding is still over a year off, she'd begun to think about plans for the wedding. In doing so, she asked my wife, her stepmom, and me for a list of guests and for what I could contribute financially toward the wedding. She's in another state, and I sent her an email, honestly telling her that given my current financial situation, I probably could not help her with the wedding, which was painful to do. As the father of the bride, because tradition has it that the bride's family pays for the wedding. It'll be a large wedding with 10 attendants on each side. I received an email back from her that where she thanked me for letting her know that she hoped my situation would improve and said really little else. I could feel the disappointment from her through the computer screen, and it has really depressed me. I know that the real love process says for me to tell the truth to others, and I will feel more loved. I understand that. I just don't see how it helps me with my own disappointment in not being able to help with the wedding. And it doesn't change her disappointment and hurt that I believe that she feels toward me. I'm going to suggest a perspective that may be helpful toward you. It's been helpful toward others. And that is that rather than see all this as disappointment and hurt, that you could see all this as just enormously helpful information and as opportunities to learn. If you're disappointed in not being able to help her with money for a wedding, then it's obviously true that you believe that she needs a big wedding with 10 attendants on each side in order to be happy. You'd have to believe that, or you wouldn't be disappointed. But does she? Does she really need a big wedding with 10 attendants on each side in order to be a happy human being? If she has a big wedding, will she have any more genuine love and happiness in her life? No. People get married all the time with no attendance, with tiny weddings, and they're happy. People get married with huge, expensive weddings, and they break up after 2 weeks. So the size of the wedding doesn't have anything to do with people's happiness. Actually, not a single thing. And if she's disappointed in your not helping her, then she believes that you have to help her financially in order to demonstrate your love for her, which also isn't true. So there's a real collusion going on here where she believes that money and spending leads to happiness, and you're supporting her in that belief. The fact that you feel the least bit disappointed, she's acting like a victim, and you're buying into it. You're going, yeah, you are being victimized. Without intending to, you're supporting her victimhood, going, yeah, you poor baby. You really are being victimized. And none of it's true. So this may actually be a good thing to dispel what is an enormous myth, a lie, actually. If you gave her tons of money, let's suppose you did. You sold everything you had and gave her tons of money for a huge wedding. All you'd have is a ton of money spent and not one bit more love or happiness. Nothing. And the lie would be perpetuated. So what could you do? Learn from it. Just let it happen. Let the wedding happen with you not spending a dime and see what happens. You could even go further. You might even try to help her in another way. You might call her and gently offer, if she'll allow it, a teaching moment for your daughter. You might ask her, for example, you might say, so, you got my message that I can't help you. What are your plans going to be? You might ask her. You might then, after she tells you what she's going to do, you might ask her if she's willing. Only ask her for suggestions. See if she's willing for suggestions about what she might consider doing about a wedding for less. Now, if she's not willing to hear it, and she says, I'm going to do this whole great big wedding and spend a whole lot of money, and I'm going to use my own money, and I'm going to sell everything, then let her do it. Let her learn on her own some of the lessons that we've all had to learn on our own at great cost. But if she's willing to hear suggestions, I've done this with my own kids on many occasions. Sometimes they're about to make a huge mistake, and I'll say, I hear you're going to whatever, blank. Would you like to hear a suggestion or two? Sometimes they say, no, I'm going to do it anyway. Okay. But sometimes they've said, yeah, I would like to hear a suggestion. And sometimes you may be able to offer her a suggestion or two that would save her a great deal of time, energy, money, and heartache. There are, a handful of books on Amazon.com alone just written entirely about how to conduct cheap weddings. I went there just for fun and looked them up. All about how to do fun weddings. The whole point of a wedding is to bring two people together and unite them in a loving relationship. That's the point. And to bring the families together and give them an opportunity to celebrate. Not to impress people and spend money. I know people who have, for example, gotten people together in a public park, brought the minister together and paid him $100, had a potluck dinner, and that's it. So the total cost of this event is, $100 and paper plates, because people brought potluck dinner. That's pretty inexpensive. We have this sense of entitlement in our society that we owe our children 4 years of college and we have to pay for it, that we owe them a great big wedding and we have to pay for it, that we owe them a car when they turn 16, that we owe them, and on it goes. And where is all this written? And then when they don't get it, they're disappointed. And then we're supposed to feel guilty. It's all really kind of silly, really. So you can buy into it or not. Here's somebody who said, my son bought a new car, and as he was telling me about it, we came around to the interest rate for the car, and it was high. I reacted by repeating it in a voice filled with shock, saying, blank point blank percent? Wow! And followed it up with, why is it so high? And then he reacted by saying, yeah, I guess my credit rating is not in the 700s, huh? He sounded like he'd done something wrong. Well, of course he did. And I'm sure he felt like a complete idiot because what you were telling him was he was stupid. You continued. Ignoring that, I went into immediate fix mode. Oh, goodness me and my big mouth. Anyway, I started saying, well, maybe it's not too late to try this place or that place. And I started fixing, and he said, hey, Mom, my brain is fried just now. And I was at the dealer's today for hours, so we began to talk about other things, but I felt like such a heel. I wasn't loving. My reaction showed a lack of confidence in his ability to handle his business. I showed a lack of concern for his happiness. Instead of focusing on the stupid interest rate, I could have asked how he felt handling his first major purchase on his own. Instead, I made him feel like he'd done something wrong, and I gave him all of this advice about who to call, what to say, and to top it off. Anyway, she just made him feel terrible. But the cool thing is, you recognize what you did. And so what can you do about it now? You can have a subsequent conversation with him about it. And you can say, do you remember that conversation earlier where you called and you talked all excited about the car, and then what did I do? I opened my big mouth and ruined the whole thing and told you what you should have done about the interest rate. Can we hit rewind on that? Or whatever verbiage you want to use, but it's just kind of a metaphor or verbal image that most kids would identify with. I want to back that up. Erase that. Delete. I was stupid. What I meant to say was, how exciting. How cool that you now have your car. I'm excited for you. Tell me about the car. What year is it? How does it drive? Does it have that new car smell? Blah, blah. Let him blab about the car. That's why he called you, was to tell you how excited he was about the car. The interest rate's irrelevant. He doesn't want to talk about any of that. And he doesn't want your advice. Of course, you know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You know all that. When our kids call us to tell us something like that, they want to tell us how excited they are and how they're enjoying it. And boy, we just ruin it all when we give them advice, don't we? So, good for you that you see it. And I've done that same kind of stupid thing many times. This person says, I'm often disconcerted. In other words, I'm probably angry. That I love my children, or that I'm unable to love my children without an investment for myself. I have a lot of opportunities to practice. Much of human history involved parents caring for their children and then children caring for their parents. The part about children caring for their parents probably has caused a lot of heartbreak for many parents throughout history. This is something I need to let go of. This expectation in my DNA, because it will make me happier, right? Yes, it really will. The most common reason that parents have children is so that their children will love them. And this has been recorded over and over and over again. I was reading an article in a newspaper not long ago where a mother had abandoned a child and left the child either out in the street or in a dumpster, and they were interviewing the mother and asking her how she could do such a terrible thing, and then people go, so terrible, how could this happen? And the mother explained it so beautifully. I went, oh, perfect. And the mother said, I just wanted a baby so that I'd have somebody who could love me. And this was just some poor little dumb 17-year-old, never graduated from high school, unemployed little girl. Just actually a little baby. I mean, 17 years old, she looked like a woman, but she wasn't a woman. She was a little baby. And so here's this little baby having a baby. She'd never been loved. And so she had this little baby so that the little baby would love her. Kind of like a little wind-up doll that you could pull the string on the back, and then the little baby would reach out and pat the mother on the cheeks and say, I love you. That's why this little girl had the little baby. And then she discovered what babies really do, which is poop and fill their diapers and scream and cry all night and demand to be fed and demand to be changed and demand to be held and demand. And she discovered that babies aren't born in the world to love their parents. Babies are born into the world to be loved. And this poor little, it was 15, it was a young little girl. This little young girl just went crazy because her expectations of this little child were not met. In fact, that's kind of an understatement. And she took the little child outside and dropped the kid in a dumpster and walked off. And other people are clucking their tongues, and I'm going, I get it. And pretty much any parent who has walked the floor all night long with a child who's been screaming has had the thought of putting a child in a dumpster more than once. Maybe they didn't do it, but they've thought about it. Here's somebody who says about the primary decision, we talked about that earlier, what it is. If I intellectually understand the importance of the primary decision from both a real love and biblical standpoint, what are the chances that either I or my spouse will make the decision at another real love seminar or retreat if we refuse to make the decision here at home when we've already attended seminars and have the support of loving groups and many wise men and women? I think what you're asking is, it's a decision that comes and goes. You know, what are the chances we're going to make it here and then change our minds and make it again later at another? This is a hard decision to make. What you're really terrified of doing is you're afraid of being the only one to make the primary decision. That's your real fear. See, we don't ever want to be the one to take the risk of making the decision by ourselves. It's like, okay, I'll make the primary decision to make you first if you make it too. It's like, I'll commit to be unconditionally loving toward you if you do it too. Well, that's not unconditional love. That's conditional. I'll love you if you're loving. I'll be nice to you if you're nice. I'll forgive you if you forgive me. Well, see, that's the whole point of unconditional love, is that it really begins to change a relationship when one person decides, I'm just going to let it all go. I had a man call me not long ago who said, my whole relationship with my wife has begun to change. I said, really? What happened? He said, I've been reading real love, I've been talking about real love, I've been talking to you for the longest time, and he said, I finally realized that nothing's going to change until I do. And I said, congratulations, you're growing up. And I wasn't being condescending. It really is a process of growing up, maturing. He said, I had to be the one who was forgiving first. I had to let go of all the past wounds. I had to decide that I was going to love her first. And that's when everything starts to change. When I decide I'm going to be the loving one, not I'm going to love her if she anything. So that's the definition of unconditional love. There's no if. There's no yes, I know that's the right thing, but nope, it's just the right thing. Period. So I look forward to seeing you guys in a week. Please send your questions to me at greg@reallove.com. If we didn't get to your question, we'll try to get to it next Tuesday. And I look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, it's always about real love. See you then.